They say love is the most powerful force in the world. But what happens when that love turns into betrayal? When the person you trusted the most becomes the one who breaks you? This is my story, a story of love, betrayal, and revenge. A story that will make you question everything you believe about loyalty and vengeance. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear will haunt you long after the video ends. This is the story of how I lost everything and how I took it all back. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Perfection. Life was a carefully constructed facade, a house of cards that I believed would stand forever. My name is Jake Harper, and I was living the American dream in the suburbs of Chicago. I had a successful career as an architect, a beautiful wife named Emily, and 2 wonderful children who filled our home with laughter and joy. Emily and I met in college, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was the one. We were inseparable, and our love seemed unbreakable. We built a life together, filled with shared dreams and aspirations. I was convinced that nothing could tear us apart. Every evening, we would sit at the dinner table, sharing stories about our day. Emily was a rising star in her company, and I was proud of her achievements. I supported her every step of the way, never imagining that her ambition would lead her down a path of destruction. Little did I know, the cracks in our perfect life were already beginning to show. Emily started coming home later and later, her excuses growing more and more transparent. I tried to ignore the signs, convincing myself that it was just the stress of her job. But deep down, I felt a gnawing sense of unease. It was as if a shadow had crept into our home, casting a pall over our once bright future. Chapter 2. The First Cracks. The first real sign that something was wrong came one chilly autumn evening. I was sitting in our living room, the fireplace crackling softly, when Emily walked in. Her eyes were distant, and there was a tension in her shoulders that I hadn't noticed before. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my stomach was already twisting into knots. She hesitated, then forced a smile. "It was fine, just busy as usual." I nodded, but something in her voice made me uneasy. I wanted to press her, to ask if everything was okay, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I let it go, choosing to believe her. But the signs kept piling up. Emily started working late more frequently, often missing dinner with the family. When she was home, she seemed distant, her mind somewhere else. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed off my concerns, saying it was just work stress. One night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand. It was a message, and before I could stop myself, I reached for it. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Mark." My blood ran cold. Mark was her boss, a charismatic man who had always made me feel a little uneasy. I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. Was it innocent? Or was there something more going on? I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake, a storm of emotions raging inside me. Doubt, anger, and fear clawed at my heart, and I felt the first real cracks in our marriage begin to form. Chapter 3. The Shattering Revelation. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home grew palpable. Emily's behavior became more erratic, her excuses more flimsy. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was crumbling, and I felt powerless to stop it. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. The kids were in bed, and the house was eerily quiet. Emily seemed distant, her eyes fixed on her plate. I took a deep breath, deciding that I couldn't live in this state of uncertainty any longer. "Emily," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We need to talk. Something's been off for a while now, and I can't ignore it anymore." She looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and resignation. "I know," she said softly. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." My heart pounded in my chest. "Tell me what?" She took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been seeing someone else," she whispered. It's Mark. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Mark, your boss? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I sat there, stunned, as the reality of her betrayal sank in. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How could she do this to us, to our family? Why? I finally managed to ask, my voice cracking with emotion. She shook her head, unable to meet my gaze. I don't know. I was lonely, I guess. I felt like we were drifting apart. Her words cut deeper than any knife. I had always believed that our love was unbreakable, but now I saw it for the fragile thing it truly was. I am sorry, she said, her voice barely audible, but I couldn't find it in me to forgive her. Not then. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I got up from the table, my legs feeling like lead, and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears. Chapter 4. The fractured home. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Emily and I barely spoke, the weight of her betrayal hanging over us like a dark cloud. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the kids, but it was a struggle. They sensed the tension between us, their innocent eyes filled with questions they were too young to ask. I wanted to shield them from the truth, to protect them from the ugliness that had invaded our home. Emily moved into the guest room, and the physical distance between us only amplified the emotional chasm that had opened up. I found myself lying awake at night, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what would come next. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard Emily's voice from the hallway. "Jake, can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded. She entered the room, her eyes red from crying. "I know I hurt you," she began, her voice trembling, "and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids." Her words were like salt in an open wound. "Then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice raw with emotion. She sighed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't have a good answer. I was selfish, and I let my feelings for Mark cloud my judgment. But I realize now that it was a mistake. I love you, Jake. I always have." Her confession was a double-edged sword. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold onto the love we had shared for so long. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the betrayal, couldn't let go of the anger and hurt. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. Take all the time you need." As she left the room, I felt a sense of despair settle over me. Our marriage was in tatters, and I had no idea if it could ever be repaired. Chapter 5. The descent into darkness. The weeks turned into months, and the pain of Emily's betrayal became a constant companion. I found myself sinking deeper into a pit of despair, unable to shake the feeling of betrayal and loss. The life I had known, the future I had envisioned, was gone, and in its place was a void that seemed impossible to fill. I threw myself into my work, using it as a shield to block out the pain. Long hours at the office became my refuge, a place where I could escape the reality of my crumbling marriage. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the thoughts of what had happened always found a way to creep back in. At home, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Emily and I were like strangers living under the same roof, our interactions limited to the bare necessities. The kids were caught in the middle, their innocent lives disrupted by the tension that permeated every corner of the house. I started drinking more, using alcohol as a crutch to numb the pain. It was a dangerous path, but in those moments of inebriation, I found a temporary reprieve from the anguish that consumed me. My friend Liam noticed the change in me and tried to intervene, but I pushed him away, unwilling to face the reality of my situation. One night, as I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, a bottle of whiskey in hand, I felt a darkness settle over me. It was as if a shadow had crept into my soul, feeding on my pain and anger. I thought about Emily and Mark, and the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't just let them get away with what they had done. I needed to take back control, to make them feel the same pain they had inflicted on me. It was a dangerous thought, but in my state of mind, it seemed like the only way to find closure. Chapter 6. A Glimmer of Hope. As the days dragged on, the weight of my despair threatened to crush me entirely. The darkness that had enveloped me since Emily's betrayal felt impenetrable, and I struggled to find a reason to keep going. But then, something unexpected happened. A glimmer of hope appeared in the form of Samantha. Samantha was a colleague at my architecture firm, someone I had known casually for years, but never really connected with on a personal level. She was kind, intelligent, and had a warmth about her that was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, she stopped me in the hallway. "Hey, Jake," she said, her voice gentle. "I know things have been tough for you lately. I just wanted to let you know that I am here if you need someone to talk to." Her words caught me off guard. I had become so accustomed to the coldness and distance in my life that her kindness felt like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond, but something in her eyes made me want to open up. "Thanks, Samantha," I said finally. "I appreciate that." We started talking more frequently, first about work, then about life in general. She listened patiently as I poured out my heart, never judging, always offering a sympathetic ear. Slowly, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, finding solace in her understanding and empathy. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Samantha invited me to join her for dinner. We went to a small, cozy restaurant, and as we sat across from each other, I felt a sense of comfort that I hadn't felt in a long time. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of joy. As we left the restaurant, Samantha turned to me and said, "You know, Jake, you are not alone in this. You deserve to be happy, and I believe you will be again." Her words resonated with me, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for me to find happiness again. It was a small step, but it was a start. Chapter 7. Facing the Past. With Samantha's support, I began to find my footing again. The darkness that had consumed me started to lift, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. However, I knew that to truly move forward, I had to confront the past and deal with the lingering pain of Emily's betrayal. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I found Emily in the living room, reading a book. The atmosphere was tense, as it always was when we were alone together. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of apprehension and hope. "Okay," she replied softly. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, trying to find the right words to express what I was feeling. "I can't keep living like this," I began. "The anger, the resentment, it's eating me alive. I need to understand why you did it." Emily sighed, setting her book aside. "I wish I had a simple answer," she said. "But the truth is, I was lost. I felt like we were growing apart, and Mark, he was there. It was a mistake, and I regret it more than anything." Her words were painful to hear, but they also brought a sense of clarity. I realized that her betrayal wasn't just about me. It was about her own struggles and insecurities. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it helped me understand it a little better. "I forgive you," I said finally, the words feeling both foreign and liberating. "Not because what you did was okay, but because I need to let go of this pain. I can't keep holding on to it." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you, Jake. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." It wasn't an easy conversation, and the road to rebuilding our relationship would be long and difficult. But it was a step towards healing and reconciliation. Chapter 8. The Road to Redemption. With a fragile truce established between Emily and me, we began the arduous journey of rebuilding our relationship. It was a path fraught with challenges, but also filled with small victories and moments of hope. We started attending couples therapy, a decision that was both daunting and necessary. In the safe space of the therapist's office, we learned to communicate in ways we never had before. We talked about our fears, our regrets, and our hopes for the future. It was uncomfortable at times, but it was also incredibly cathartic. One of the biggest hurdles we faced was rebuilding trust. Emily was determined to prove that she was committed to our marriage, and she made a concerted effort to be more present and attentive. She cut back on her work hours, making our family a priority once again. It wasn't easy for her, but she was determined to show me that she was serious about change. For my part, I had to learn to let go of the anger and resentment that had been my constant companions for so long. It was a daily struggle, But with Samantha's encouragement and Emily's efforts, I found myself slowly beginning to heal. The kids were a source of joy and motivation for both of us. They had been through so much, and we were determined to give them the stability and love they deserved. We made a conscious effort to create a positive and nurturing environment for them, and their laughter and smiles became a reminder of what we were fighting for. As the months passed, I noticed a change in myself. The darkness that had once threatened to overwhelm me was replaced by a sense of peace and optimism. I still had moments of doubt and pain, but they were becoming less frequent and less intense. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving us another chance. I know it wasn't easy, but I promise I'll never take it for granted." I took her hand in mine, feeling a sense of gratitude and hope. "We're in this together," I replied, "and I believe we can make it work." Chapter 9. The Calm Before the Storm. Life began to settle into a new rhythm, one that was more stable and hopeful than it had been in a long time. Emily and I were working hard to rebuild our marriage, and there were moments when I felt like we were finally getting back to the way things used to be. The kids seemed happier, and the tension that had once filled our home was slowly dissipating. Samantha remained a supportive presence in my life, though our relationship had shifted. We were still friends, but I made it clear that my focus was on repairing my marriage. She understood and respected my decision, and I was grateful for her friendship and understanding. However, as the saying goes, old habits die hard. Despite our progress, there were still moments when the past would creep back in, casting a shadow over our newfound peace. Emily's late nights at the office occasionally stirred up old insecurities, and I had to remind myself that she was committed to change. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Emily called to say she would be working late again. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety, but I pushed it aside, choosing to trust her. When she finally came home, I could tell something was off. She seemed distant, her mind elsewhere. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She nodded, offering a weak smile. "Yeah, just a long day." But I could sense that there was more to it. I tried to let it go, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her, but the feeling lingered. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to call Liam, hoping he could offer some perspective. "Hey, Liam," I said when he picked up. "I need to talk." Chapter 10. The Unraveling. Liam met me at a local coffee shop, his expression concerned as he sat across from me. "What's going on, Jake?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "It's Emily," I began. "I don't know, something just feels off. She's been working late again, and when she comes home, she's distant. I can't help but feel like something's wrong." Liam listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "Have you talked to her about it?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't want to push her away. We've come so far, and I don't want to ruin it by being paranoid." Liam leaned back in his chair, considering my words. "I get that, but you can't ignore your instincts either. Maybe it's nothing, but if T here is something going on, you need to address it." His advice resonated with me, and I knew he was right. I needed to talk to Emily to get to the bottom of what was bothering her. But a part of me was terrified of what I might find out. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I took a deep breath and broached the subject. "Emily, can we talk about what's been going on? You've been distant lately, and I can't help but worry." She looked up, her expression guarded. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, her voice tight. I pressed on, trying to keep my tone calm and non-confrontational. "I just feel like T here is something you are not telling me. Is everything okay at work?" For a moment, she hesitated, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. "It's nothing," she said finally. "Just stress, that's all." But I knew there was more to it. The tension in the air was palpable, and I felt a sense of dread settle over me. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was being honest, but my instincts told me otherwise. Later that night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant risking everything we had worked so hard to rebuild. The next morning, I called in sick to work and decided to follow Emily. It was a desperate move, one that I never imagined I would resort to, but I felt like I had no other choice. Chapter 11. The Final Betrayal. The morning was crisp and clear as I sat in my car, parked a discreet distance from our house. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anxiety and guilt swirling inside me. I felt like a stranger in my own life, driven to this desperate act by suspicion and fear. After what felt like an eternity, Emily emerged from the house, her expression unreadable. I watched as she got into her car and pulled out of the driveway. I hesitated for a moment, then started my engine and followed her, keeping a safe distance. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrible than the last. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for her behavior. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. Emily drove to a part of town I didn't recognize, pulling into the parking lot of a small cafe. I parked across the street, my heart in my throat, and watched as she got out of her car and walked inside. I waited, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, trying to make sense of what was happening. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of my car and made my way to the cafe, my legs feeling like lead. As I entered, I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Emily. She was sitting at a table in the corner, her back to me. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize, his hand resting on hers. My heart sank as I took in the scene, a wave of nausea washing over me. I approached the table, my mind numb with shock. Emily looked up, her eyes widening in surprise and fear. "Jake," she stammered, pulling her hand away from the man. "What are you doing here?" I stared at her, unable to find the words to express the betrayal I felt. The man looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then said, "I am Mark. Emily and I work together." The name sent a jolt through me. Mark, the same man she had cheated with before. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt my world crumbling around me. "Emily, how could you?" I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. She looked down, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong." I stood there, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a precipice. The pain was unbearable, and I knew that this time there was no coming back from it. In that moment, I made a decision. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Emily and Mark behind. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, a clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. As I drove away, I realized that I had reached the end of a long and painful journey. The betrayal I had experienced had changed me in ways I never imagined, but it had also taught me a valuable lesson about love, trust, and forgiveness. I knew that my marriage was over, but I also knew that I had the strength to move on. I thought about the love I had once shared with Emily and the love I hoped to find again someday. In the end, I realized that the true measure of a person is not in their failures, but in their ability to rise above them. And as I looked to the future, I knew that I would find a way to heal, to love again, and to live a life filled with hope and happiness. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it's also an opportunity for growth and renewal. If you've been through a similar experience, I urge you to share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other and find strength in our shared experiences. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more stories that explore the complexities of love and life. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are not alone.